Good afternoon, dear ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon, dear colleagues, friends. It also gives me a lot of pleasure to welcome you here at the St. Petersburg Economic Forum. And of course, it is really very pleasant that this year there is a stronger attention to the forum. The reasons are understandable. This is not accidental, because last year, I remember, we were exchanging impressions with our counterparts and colleagues, with leaders of other countries and heads of governments, with the heads of companies. The mood was more complicated. Today, despite the fact that complications are still there, nevertheless, certain changes are felt in this overall mood. Besides, the presence of very well-known politicians and businessmen from different countries of the world is not only an indication of a growing reputation of the forum itself, but also a testimony to a growing attention towards our country, towards Russia, which is of particular pleasure to me, towards the policy that we're pursuing. And this policy currently is being described by a very short and a very strong word, the policy of modernization. Since the day of our last meeting, not only 12 months have gone by, but something more important has happened. We have changed. And today I would like to elaborate upon the kind of changes which are taking place in Russia, as well as share with you some of the news about our decisions and about what we're going to do further on. And I hope that these are going to be good news. First of all, we changed because the whole world has changed. The world which we see today does not look the kind of the world of 5 years ago and even 12 months ago. Things which seemed infallible have collapsed. The bubbles have burst which created the illusion of prosperity. The myths have evaporated which looked like reality. Since the beginning of the crisis in the financial sector, about 1.8 trillion US dollars have been written off, which exceeds the size of the GDP of the prevalent majority of the Eurozone countries. These write-offs are twice as large as the amount of the anti-crisis fund, which recently has been set up by the European Union. And this is not the end of it, because the financial institutions still continue to register losses. The wave of all kinds of different problems has engulfed the world. Thousands and hundreds of corporate defaults in the US during the past 2 years through the procedures of financial stimulus. More than 250 banks have gone through, and during the 5 years preceding that year, there were just about a dozen cases like that. Liberalism in the world, whether we want it or not, has given way to a moderate and sometimes not very moderate protectionism. High ratings no longer guarantee to investors the soundness of their investments. For the first time during many years, very loudly we hear to talk about the need for structural reforms, not as much in the developing nations, but in the first place in the developed countries. Recently it was very strange to hear that the crisis, the threat of the crisis of the sovereign default and the budget deficits will brim over the top in the advanced economies. But today it is the reality, and we're used to it. Within this reality, economic models are changing, financial architecture, technologies, social institutions are changing. Flexibility and an ability to adapt are the kind of words which became quite much more popular than the notion of stability and predictability. It doesn't make everybody joyous. This is quite evident. There are some powerful debates revolving around it, even in the European Union, but changes will continue. The only thing that within this flow of change one can state with certainty is that we will never go back to the past order and to the past development models. For Russia, this situation poses both a challenge and an opportunity. We do live in unique times, and we must use it and utilize it in order to build modern, strong and prospering Russia, the kind of Russia which will act as a co-founder of a new global economic order and an equal participants of a collective political leadership in the post-crisis world. In the course of the next decade, these are our plans. Russia ought to become the country where the welfare and the high quality of life of its citizens are brought about not as much by the resource industries, but by intellectual resources, innovative economy, which creates unique knowledge through exports of state-of-the-art technologies, exports of the product of innovative activities. Russia must become an attractive country where people will strive to come from all over the world in search for their particular dream, in their quest for better opportunities, for success, for self-implementation, which Russia will be able to offer to anyone who will be ready to take that challenge and come to love Russia as their new or as their second home. So these are the objectives of our modernization, and these objectives, I am absolutely sure, are realistic and achievable. The most important thing we need to do in order to make it happen is the smart politics, which on the one hand would allow us to utilize our opportunities and competitive advantages, and on the other hand, creating mechanisms of continuous improvement and development. And what is this policy about? I will describe several of its components, for example, 5. The first, right now in Russia, we see favorable conditions, macroeconomic conditions for the process of modernization. In the global crisis environment, we certainly see the drawbacks of our primarily resource economy. Nevertheless, Russia has some evident advantages which should be and ought to be used for its development. In the second half of last year, we managed to stabilize the economy after a very heavy decline. And its gradual rebounding already started, considering the results of the second quarter, where economic decline amounted to almost 11% last year. Then considering the results of the Q4 last year, very much less so, about 4% this year, and it is very important to us, we started with growth. So far, the pace of this growth and the economic recovery may not be as encouraging as we would like it to be, but nevertheless, this is some good figure already in terms of the data that we have, about 4% during the first 5 months. We've got to apply more efforts. There are certain nations which demonstrate very strong recovery, and there are lessons for us to learn. The growing private savings supported the banking sector and allowed to much quicker stabilize the economy. The individual deposits only during last year grew by more than a quarter. We don't have problems with our sovereign debt. It's at the minimum level. Growth of the gold and hard currency reserves also restarted. Its current level, about $460 billion, is quite decent. And that is much higher than the similar figure by the end of 2008. Is that right? Very good. After unprecedented in terms of the scale, the measures for the economic support, we are moving over to a more weighted and cautious fiscal policy. The most important thing is that the budget deficit is controllable, although it doesn't make us feel very happy, but it stays within allowable boundaries. It doesn't suppress the objectives of our development and will continue diminishing with every year. By 2011, the deficit of the federal budget should constitute approximately 4% of the GDP, and by 2012 will go down to 3%. And further steps to minimize it will be undertaken. But of course, if everything continues to develop within the current outlook, because all of us understand what is the quantitative factors which affect our economy as well as the global economy. Inflation. Its high level during the past 10 years and over several decades was one of our most important problems. In 2009, inflation dramatically was reduced to approximately 9%. And that, of course, was brought about not only by our measures and efforts, but with the overall decline of the economic output. But this year, inflation continues to go down, and right now is at about 6% per annum. And if these figures are sustained, that will be the smallest inflation level in Russia during the past 20 years, basically during the whole period of Russia's development upon the principles of the market economy. In order to avoid excessive budget deficit and the debt crisis, today many countries decide to substantially raise taxes or reduce social programs and social care. This is explainable, but where we come from is that our social commitments are unconditional, because this is brought about by the situation that our social commitments had to go through during the past few years. We must do it in such a way that the social security we offer to the least protected would not deter progress, because we have an opportunity not to raise the tax burden apart from the kind of decisions which are already known. Apart from it, next year we will provide additional preferences to innovation companies, and against favorable environment for the global and Russian economy recovering. Within the next few years, we will go back to the issue of the general reduction of taxes for businesses, of course, if everything is developing according to the favorable plans. Secondly, the government budget policy must incentivize the structural shift in the economy. So far, we don't have too much money in the budget for structural change, but even what we have in the budget can be and should be used in a different way, in a more effective and in a more efficient way. Therefore, since 2011, we would be seriously changing our fiscal policy, reorienting the budget to deliver specific programs, creating greater emphasis upon the main priorities of our development. We have made a very strong and a very important decision to move away from funding the government institutions unrelated to the deliverables. Instead, we will fund changes, improvements, new projects, and specific deliverables. For example, the budget will pay for the introduction of the electronic government and expanding the access to a broadband internet, provide grants to young scientists and prospective research, support the growth in energy efficiency in the economy and in the utility sector. Thirdly, investment activity. Apparently, investment activity is one of the factors of innovative development and a successful modernization of our economy. Russia needs real investment boom. Creating comfortable conditions for investors essentially is our utmost task. We undertook certain steps previously as well. We were not successful in everything we did, but today we put this particular objective into the center of our activities. Some time ago, I altered the rules of the way the law enforcement was working in relationship to the budget, to the businesses. Currently, legally, the businessman cannot be arrested if there is an investigation into economic crime. The procedures for such inspections are more specifically regulated and are being supervised by the prosecutor's office. It doesn't mean that all of the problems have been resolved, but in any case, certain very specific and very serious steps have been undertaken and will continue being undertaken. Certain additional changes will be required in the criminal law, in criminal procedural acts, and in other legal frameworks. And these are the changes that I will propose. In as far as improving the investment climate is concerned, here I also hope that we're moving onwards. As of January 1st this year, we have expanded the possibility to apply the zero tax rate for profit tax in relation to the dividends. And today I am pleased to announce that in Russia, as of 2011, we will fully eliminate the capital gains tax in the case of direct long-term investments. Thank you for your support. These are the investments which we critically require to modernize our national economy. And we are ready to create the kind of institutions which will be conducive to such investments. And I will task the government to consider the idea of setting up a special investment fund where the government money will be added by private capital. Let's say for 1 ruble of government spending, we will be planning to raise 3 rubles of private investment, and the fund will be busy attracting into various projects strategic investors and in organizing co-funding of them. And their work will be organized upon an absolutely transparent and market kind of principles. I believe that this kind of an idea could be executed within a year. There is another theme, another decision, which has already taken place, and I have signed the respective act. The immigration rules have been simplified for the highly skilled labor that may come to Russia, and specifically for those who will be participating in major investment, scientific and highly technological projects. We also work upon improving the visa regulation, and hopefully that many guests of our today's forum in a very immediate future will be able to utilize these new opportunities in order to do business and to develop their career in Russia. Fourthly, we are very well aware that the modern economy is impossible to be developed and built by order from the top. No matter how many government companies we might have, modernization, first and foremost, will be done by private businesses. And only if there is competition in place. The role of the government is to create for the Russian and foreign businesses a favorable economic climate and a fair competition. Some time ago, our Nobel laureate in physics, academician Kapitsa, very like to repeat one phrase. Very often they think that the one who plucked the apple from the tree did the main job, whereas, in fact, that was done by the person who planted an apple tree. The government must not always be plucking the apples from the tree of the economy by itself. There will be someone who will be able to do it better and more effectively, but what the government must do and what makes its duty is to help to grow our apple tree orchard and help develop the economy itself, the economic environment. That is exactly why I am reducing down the number of strategic companies fivefold. The number of strategic joint stock companies is going down from 208 down to 41. Amongst the federal, state, government, unitary enterprises, from 230 down to 159. And that is the decree that I signed today. Fifth, we understand that international competition is a decisive factor for our modernization. Nothing serious can be grown in a greenhouse environment. Therefore, we want competition, and we welcome competition. Russia, since long ago, has been ready to access WTO and join the OECD. And similarly, the creation of the customs union between Russia, Belarus and Kazakhstan, further movement towards the single economic space, is our conscientious decision and choice to work inside a competitive environment. That is exactly why we're doing all of this. And these areas don't contradict each other, but rather add to each other. I mean our membership in WTO and our course at establishing the customs union and the single economic space with our immediate neighbors and partners. We know that competition can be very severe, but this only means that there is a lot for us which remains to do in order to improve the system of the government regulation, to incentivize competitiveness, not only for the Russian economy, but also for the Russian government, including the competitiveness of the Russian judiciary and legal system. An effective modernization is what we should also do about our foreign economic policy, because the successes of the Russian businesses in the global markets, as well as the real results we see from attracting technologies, investments and projects into the Russian economy, these are the main criteria in the investment processes and in such economic activities. Tomorrow in St. Petersburg, I will chair the Commission of Modernization session, and we will debate in detail how to coordinate our work with foreign counterparts in order to achieve maximum result. Dear participants of the forum, the vector and the trajectory for change, which is so necessary to achieve modernization of the Russian economy, already has been set. The Modernization Commission, which I started chairing over a year ago, is working over priority areas: energy efficiency, space, nuclear, healthcare, information technology. These are the areas which are all very important to us. Sometime Albert Einstein said that everything must be done in such a simple way as only possible, but not simpler. And that is exactly the way we are planning to act. And dozens of specific projects are already being executed under these priority areas. One of such examples is an introduction of advanced information communication technologies. We were one of the first ones to launch wireless commercial fourth-generation networks and continue developing this effort, expanding the coverage area as well as the speed of data transfer. We are setting ourselves a very ambitious task to increase the number of Internet users during very few years up to the highest possible number, maybe up to 90 people out of 100 living in this country. By 2015, Russia will completely finish a transfer to a digital television broadcasting format. By that time, 60% of the users in the country will have access to broadband internet. I also believe that the development of the national clearing and payment system, the development of the electronic information system, will pose as an important resource to expedite modernization of the society. Generally speaking, information technologies is one of the key areas for the development of democracy. The speed and the quality of feedback between the government and the society, technological expansion of the guarantees for the freedom of speech, internet technologies in the work of the political and electorate system are important to develop political systems, political institutions in this country. In a number of cases, we are changing our practices. For example, a decision was made about the possibility to apply in Russia the European Union technical standards. A certain amount of time was necessary to do that, but ultimately everybody agreed that it would be simpler to do it this way rather than boggle down into the development of our own standards, although we are going to work on it as well. We are creating small innovative companies under the universities, developing the system of the national R&D universities. As of next year, we'll fully eliminate the profit tax for the organizations which provide educational services and healthcare services. And I would also task the government to prepare a new program for the support of the education of the Russian students, Russian experts abroad in the leading research universities of the world. This program would help us strengthen our interaction with global science, with the world educational and innovation community. Of particular importance, we see the creation of the Russian Center for Innovations in Skolkovo. I submitted into the State Duma, into the Parliament, the draft law which sets a special legal regime for the center, where we would expect a unique system for our country, a system for selecting, for commercialization, for implementation, and subsequent support for commercial projects, and we will hope that the system will be successful. We will try it from different aspects, starting from legal and all the way up to the new principles of partnership between the science, government, and businesses, and then we will start to replicate the system. Support for innovations certainly must not be limited simply to this Skolkovo Center. As of next year, we will be introducing substantial tax preferences for all the companies which operate in the innovative industries. However, in the fact that there is a national innovation center being created, we see a certain idea. We come from the rules that being able to execute an effective project, we develop a model for subsequent replication and dissemination. And by the way, I would like to separately extend my gratitude to those who have already agreed to work with us in Skolkovo and became members of the advisory board. We will have a separate meeting later on and we will discuss our plans. Dear colleagues, recently, we have raised to a more active level our work to create a Russian international financial center. Our interest is obvious. For the task of modernization, we need a very well-developed and competitive, globally, national financial systems. And a well-developed financial industry in this way will also serve as the means as well as a separate goal for modernization. Developing a financial center in Moscow is a good proposition to the rest of the world. And actually, my experience of interacting with the leaders of the major banks and the major financial institutions proves this. We see our role in being able, jointly with other leading economies of the world, to improve the architecture of the global financial system, to reform international financial organizations, to establish new standards of regulating the work of the financial market, markets, because Moscow also de facto is a full-bodied financial and logistical center for the rest of Russia. More than 90% of all of the money flows and the prevalent share of cargo passes through Moscow before reaching out into the country's regions or beyond. And we find here certain advantages as well as drawbacks and some big problems, but with every year Moscow sees a greater concentration of these flows from other countries, including the CIS countries. Therefore, an establishment of such a center is a logical phase in developing a very new, powerful regional financial market. Very soon we're going to discuss this issue with our partners in the Customs Union, in the Eurasian Economic Community. The development of the Moscow Financial Center, I hope, will allow us to strongly improve and strengthen the position of ruble as one possible current reserve currency. From the overall application of ruble in our settlements, we are already working on certain specifics with our partners and counterparts. The financial system of Russia, generally speaking, is well developed in order to be able to undertake it. Specifically, despite the crisis, the size of its assets, considering the results of last year, was at about $1 trillion. In Moscow, the public financial sector is already well developed, where bonds and stocks of many hundreds of issues are being traded. The annual volumes of trade have since long ago have been measured in billions of dollars, but in terms of derivatives, Moscow already is in the top 10 global markets. In this way, our market is saturated and enough and mature enough for future growth. Legislative changes, they are very necessary here, because quite recently I chaired over a meeting dedicated to an establishment in Moscow of a financial center. And what kind of changes do we need? We need the kind that would develop comfort in performing various transactional activities and creating a more comfortable taxation. Before the end of the year, we are planning to pass the act about the regulation of consolidated financial reporting, about the regulation of activities of related parties, about central depository, and about the national settlement system. Right now, we are completing the formation of the International Advisory Council, which I hope will promote the development of the International Financial Center in Moscow. We invited to participate in the leaders of many banks and financial institutions of the world. Some of them are present here in this room. We will later on have an opportunity to talk to each other and discuss our plans. I would separately like to thank all those who agreed to work in this advisory council. We are very pragmatic people, and we do understand the amount of work, the length of the road that we have to pass through in order for Russia to enjoy a real competitive financial center. But that is something which explains our decisions to make this work active right now. Dear friends, we are truly modernizing Russia, and changes require time. But rest assured, we will do it. The main decisions have already been made, and a significant number of the projects are underway already. Russia is aware, understands the task of its development, and is changing for its own sake as well as for the sake of the rest of the world. Thank you.